In this video, we're testing out the new knob grinder. Welcome, my name is Patrick Rolfe and this is Coffee with April. For this episode, we're continuing our discovery into different hand grinders that we can all use when we're grinding coffee. So this time we're looking at this, the knob coffee grinder, which I believe after a little bit of research is a Kickstarting campaign that ended earlier this year, I think, or 2022 is now some kind of Indiegogo campaign and will continue forever. Let's see. Anyhow, it's a successful Kickstarter campaign, right? And we see a lot of different coffee campaigns that are in different shapes and form, which is always interesting. This grinder in particular was sent to me by a good friend of mine that thought I should try it. It's actually not from the company. And I'm always curious to try, so we did. Based off the Kickstarter, there's a little bit of interesting information. One is a stepless grinder. We'll show you in detail what that means. Two, the grinder doesn't have any axle. So basically the only rotating part is the top part or one part of the burst head. And this is, according to the Kickstarter, pitched to be a more stable way to grind coffee, right? That can always be discussed, but that's something they're saying. One of the things that are really interesting with the grinder is how you adjust the grind size, which one of the challenges with the grinders, let's say a grinder like Comandante, for example, is obviously going to be how do you decide that grind size? And when you have decided it in terms of clicks, you have to keep on going forth and back, right? So I used to work with Comandante when I competed in the past, but I don't do anymore because you just have to, you put too much work into it and you have to be very, very specific, right? Here, the dial is actually really easy to use and it's also easy to adjust and you just kind of lock it in with a screw on the side. So choosing that grind size is kind of an interesting one, right? Now, another part of the grinder, which is interesting, one of the first pitches on the campaign is that it's a lightweight grinder. We weighed it and it's about 850 grams. I'm not sure if that would qualify in my world as a lightweight grinder. It's sure it's a sturdy piece of equipment, which some people like. It feels like quality, I guess. I just feel it's quite heavy and maybe not very portable, which based on my own research, a lot of people buy hand grinders because of the fact that they are portable, right? So another few ideas or kind of features here is both the kind of top part where you put in the beans. Here, this little doser could also work as some kind of dosing tool where you dose up the beans, which is kind of nice. What you can see when you look inside is, again, quite a lot of static. It's a little bit dirty, but it's quite easy to take apart, so it's easy to clean, which is a good thing. It's the same thing in the base of the grinder. You kind of pop this out, which again is kind of a really nice, slick design, but the reality is that it becomes really, really static and messy. So the second I take a grind of anything above 12 grams, let's say I grind 20 grams, for example, I'm gonna have a bunch of messy coffee all over the place when I open it up, which I'm not so happy with. That being said, and over to maybe the more important part of any kind of grinder is the grind quality, right? So what we're gonna do here in terms of testing it is we're gonna use our basic recipe, which is 12 to 200. So 12 grams of coffee, 200 grams of water. We're working with a wash processed Kenyan coffee this time. And we're using the first wood prototype of the April Brewer, more about that in a different video, for the actual brewing. Now, the grind size I've chosen here is 29 on the first kind of round of settings. So what this grinder do, as many other grinders do as well, is the fact that you can actually go several rounds or steps on the dial, right? So the highest dial here on this grinder goes up to, I believe it's 36, and you can actually then go 36, rotate up, and then rotate up again, right? So you have a very, very large range of different grind sizes, right? Which is something I've always thought to be quite interesting when it comes to grinders, because in my experience, also professionally in a setup like this, the amount of grind range you actually need as a professional barista is very, very slim. Naturally, a bit depending on the dose, maybe a little bit depending on the equipment you're using, but in general, we don't really need endless opportunities in terms of grind size. We just need good grind quality. So, for some reason here, this grinder only goes counterclockwise. So we're going to try that. So given the fact that it is a hand grinder, it's always going to be a little bit of work to kind of get this done. A few small tricks when using any kind of hand grinder is that the angle of the grinder matters a lot in terms of grinding consistency. Obviously, the speed of your grinding is also going to be affecting quite a lot on that actually grind quality. That's why I'm so surprised to see so many hand grinders, for example, in world championships, right? Because an electrical grinder would be a far more consistent way to grind coffee. Now we're popping this out. Popping this in. 12.2 grams in the grinder, 12 grams out. Relatively straightforward. And here we're going to do a simple two-step pour. First pour is 50 gram circle, 50 grams center. I'm going to let that sit for 35 seconds and then basically just repeat the pour. Now, the flow rates and the grind qualities will always differ depending on the grinder we're using, right? And the microns that we're using in this grinder here on 29 is going to give us just below 600. So we're about 570. A little bit depending on how many times we do the measurements as well. And microns is a good reference for what you're looking for in terms of grind size. But what it really comes down to with any kind of given grinder is really the distribution of those microns, right? Because some grinders produces really large particles, lesser, smaller particles, and that's going to have a different average of micron, right? So when we calculate microns, there's always going to be an average of a lot of different grind qualities that are within the same kind of dose. A lot of the times, about 50 grams of the dose is very consistent, and then the other 50 grams are kind of spread all from very small to very large, right? Now we're going to let this go down. We're going to do our usual testing and tasting, and then we're going to get back to you with a little bit more feedback about the grinder. So the verdict of the knob grinder, well, as most grinders, it can actually produce a really tasty cup of coffee. There's not really, I don't think that's ever been the discussion. I think my fascination with hand grinders or any kind of grinders is the fact that we now have so many different grinders, right? And they're all kind of pitching, solving some very specific answers like uniform grind size, portable, lightweight, easier to use, and so on and so on. And I think, to be fair, the dial on this grinder makes a lot of sense. The fact that it doesn't have an axle is interesting. I'm yet to I need to experience it more to really try to understand what the difference there is. Obviously, there's some kind of alignment issue that you might avoid, which is interesting. But then again, I haven't had many discussions about alignment issues on, let's say, Comandante, right? So that's an interesting conversation to kind of look into. So there's some smart things, there's some less smart things, as with all grinders, right? I think in general, it's interesting. If you have a Comandante, do you need this as well? That can always be discussed. I'm going to let you guys decide that. I think, again, what's interesting here is that we do get a high quality cuff profile. It's kind of easy to grind with. It's just not very portable because it's quite heavy and clunky, which is not really my thing. I would prefer an electrical grinder over a more expensive hand grinder any day of the week, but that's just me. But overall, it's interesting. And I mean, I know there's a bunch of you out there that literally pledged for this on Kickstarter. So maybe share a little bit on why did you do that? Why is it interesting for you? I've already done a Patreon video with this grinder, which is a little more in-depth as well, if you want to kind of have a bit more details about it. But overall, it's interesting. It seems to fit well with our April Brewers as well. So we're kind of curious to see what will happen when this grinder goes out on the market. And the The person that kind of designed this is more than welcome to come with some feedback as well if they want us to, maybe use it in a little bit of a different way. Let's see. Anyway, we think it's an interesting grinder, and we're looking forward to trying more on this channel as well. As always, if you have any grinders that you recommend, you're very welcome to kind of come up with it. We're always interested. We're always happy to try them. And with that, we just want to thank you all for watching. We want to give a special thank you to all of our Patreon supporters. It's because of you that we are able to continue to make these videos. And we want you all to feel free to always come with suggestions and ideas on the content that you want to see, because we are doing this for you and because of you. Thank you from all of us here at April.